I'd say 20 pounds of carefully selected, if not documented, samples.
Hey folks, welcome to Beyond Our Future, where we discuss space, rockets, exploration missions, and everything in between. In today's video, we'll uncover the secrets of the lost Apollo missions. So, let's begin. The true story of Apollo Flights 18, 19, and 20's lost missions is a sad blank chapter in American space history. It bears uncanny similarities to NASA's current situation. If the Apollo 18 through 20 missions were completed, today's schoolchildren could be looking at stunning photographs taken from the mountain-rimmed floors of the young impact craters Copernicus and Tycho, or the terrain on the far side of the moon, or frozen volcanic lava flows from billions of years ago. However, the turbulent political climate of the early 1970s dragged these aspirations back to Earth like a gravitational pull. The Vietnam War, soaring inflation, and social upheaval fueled the turmoil of the early 1970s. The counterculture movement despised science, which was seen as the source of environmental damage. Furthermore, President Richard Nixon was not a fan of former President John F. Kennedy's Apollo Moon project, despite the fact that Nixon was in office and received all of the credit when we landed on the moon in 1969. Nixon could have easily outdone Kennedy's vision by declaring Mars our next target. In fact, Spiro Agnew, his vice president, promoted the idea. Using nuclear engines in development, the massive Saturn V booster could have gotten us to Mars by the mid-1980s. Declaring a Man on Mars program, on the other hand, would have appeared extravagant and would have not received popular support in the 1970s. There was also concern that an Apollo crew could be lost. The Apollo 13 disaster was a near miss. The Apollo missions were the space-age equivalent of barnstorming. The fatal accident appeared to be statistically likely, and the consequences could be that the country loses its desire to send more humans deeper into space. On the contrary, the deadly Challenger and Columbia space shuttle disasters increased public support for space travel. The hesitation to embark on increasingly risky moon missions runs counter to the core American value of conquering the unknown frontier. Following the recommendations of a presidential task force in 1969, Nixon directed NASA to discontinue production of the muscular Saturn V's in favor of the space shuttle, the first leg of an as-yet unrealized space transportation infrastructure. The last three Apollo 18, 19, and 20 missions were still in the planning stages when Neil Armstrong set foot on the moon in 1969, but NASA began canceling flights 6 months later, 6 months after Armstrong's giant leap for mankind transmission. Polls showed that public interest in the United States was already dwindling. Apollo was dubbed the Space Olympics. We had gotten to the moon before the Soviets. The game is over. What's more, the most potentially scientifically rewarding, dramatic, and risky sites were planned for Apollo 18 through 20 missions. Copernicus, Gassendi, and Tycho, all young and large impact craters, were potential landing sites. At the time of the impacts, their craggy central peaks were thrust upward, bringing material from deep within the lunar crust to the surface. Harrison Schmitt, an astronaut geologist, lobbied NASA to send explorers on a daring flight to the moon's far side crater, Tsiolkovsky Crater. Schroeder's Valley was another location, a deep winding channel, hundreds of miles long with a smaller inner channel that meanders like slow rivers on Earth. It's well known for its mineral resources. In some sci-fi alternate universes, the Saturn V and Apollo spacecraft remain on the assembly line until the end of the 20th century. With only 4 Saturn V launches, a permanent space station could be built by 1980. In 1985, astronauts planted an American flag on Mars. We test techniques for diverting Earth-threatening asteroids by 1995. By 2008, massive space observatories will have cataloged nearby inhabited exoplanets. Today, all we can do is gaze pensively at NASA Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter images of the craggy central peak of Tycho Crater. So, this was it for today, guys. We hope you enjoyed our content. Like and share the video if you did. Subscribe to Beyond Our Future for many more amazing videos. Stay tuned, as we'll be back soon with another informative video for your amusement. Till then, keep exploring.